Guys can go ahead and be seated. Happy Mother's Day. I'm glad that I get the opportunity to speak on Mother's Day. I will tell you, when Pastor Doug first told me he was going to be out, I was like, yeah, super. I'm sure mothers want to hear 34-year-old dude talk about Mother's Day, because he really knows so much about what you guys go through. But I started thinking about this, and I was like, well, if we say half the world is male, half the world is female, that immediately says 50% of the people are not mothers, and then we know not all females are mothers. And I was like, so, I'm actually in the majority by not being a mother. But I also realized the fact that because we are here, we all have mothers. So I'm not necessarily focusing exclusively on mothers today. I'm focusing on people that have mothers. So if you thought you were going to come to church and hear a Mother's Day sermon that didn't apply to you, hopefully that won't happen. Last night, my daughter Emily informed me that every kid has to get up on Mother's Day before their mom and bring them a card in bed. I was like, okay, where did you get that? Is Aaron feeding you this information, and are you about to tell me how we make breakfast and all that kind of stuff? And she said, no, we learned that at school. So I was like, okay, well, that's nice. I'll wake you up in the morning and we'll go give mom a card. And so it was 6:30 and we were awake and we thought we heard her, and it was just the cat. And so then it was 6:45 and then it was 7, and I was like, all right, we got to get going. So I went in and I had to wake her up, and I don't know if you know what it's like to be woken up out of a dead away asleep, because she went to bed really late last night. But when I woke her up, her eyes were whoom. Why am I awake? What's going on? I was probably just in a really great dream. And I was like, hey, it's Mother's Day. We need to go give mom a card. And she goes, okay. I'm not a lot tired. I'm just a little tired. And I was like, oh, okay, come on. So we get it. And she was busting. So she got the card she made at school, and she went in the bedroom, and then she just stood next to Aaron. And so Aaron's fake sleeping. And I was like, you got to say good morning or wake her up or something like that. And so she's like, okay, Happy Mother's Day. I was like, okay, well, I'm glad she was fake sleeping. Otherwise, we'd hear some interesting stories about this. So, but I think about that that's Mother's Day for some people. But I also recognize Mother's Day for other people stinks. There are those of us here probably this morning and maybe who are going to listen to this that would love to be mothers, but it just hasn't worked out for us. There are some of us here potentially that are celebrating or mourning the fact that this is the first Mother's Day without their mom or without their grandmother. There are people here today who have awful relationships with their mom and can't stand this day and flip through the commercials and really despise Hallmark for about a week and a half because they're told this is the cookie cutter way that Mother's Day should look. And if it doesn't look that way for you, then something's wrong. So what I want you to hear this morning is a story of Hannah, who was the mother of Samuel, and some things that you can take away regardless of if you have a 5-year-old girl waking you up with a card this morning, regardless of if you're mourning the fact that you don't have your mom with you, regardless of if you really can't stand this day because you know you've got to go and see your mom, and it's really a frustrating time because she tells you what's wrong with your hair, and she asks you if you've gone to school, and she does this and does that and really gets on your nerves. But regardless of what the relationship exists like for you today, I think there are some things that we can take away from this story about Hannah that will help us with wherever we are in our relationship. So let's turn, we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 1, and we're actually going to sneak into chapter 2 a little bit. I promise I'm not going to read you 70 verses or whatever it would be to do all of chapter 1 and all of chapter 2. But in order to get kind of a good overview of Hannah's story. We're going to read little clips here and there of how she developed and changed. So 1 Samuel chapter 1 is on 267 if you are using the Pew Bible. And we're going to start, we're actually going to start in verse 2 because verse 1 has a bunch of names that are going to be hard to pronounce and are not particularly going to be helpful for you. So when in verse 2 when it says he had 2 wives, we're going to be talking about Elkanah, who is the husband of Hannah. So that's really all you need to know is Elkanah is the husband of Hannah, and Hannah we will see is the mother of Samuel. So we'll pick up in verse 2. He had 2 wives. One was called Hannah and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Year after year, this man went up from his town to worship and sacrifice to the Lord Almighty at Shiloh, where Hophni and Phinehas, the 2 sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord. Whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, and the Lord had closed her womb. Because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not eat. Her husband Elkanah would say to her, Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? So I think a significant takeaway from the background that we get about Hannah is that Hannah's life was not fair. And I don't know if you ever got the talk from your parents, from your mom, from your dad, but there were numerous situations in my life, times when I would come home, I would present a scenario that happened at school, a scenario that happened at church, a scenario that happened at work, and my response, or the response from my parents would be, well, you know what, Jay? Life's not fair. And then they would give me an example in their life about why life's not fair. And so if you're like me, you may be able to quote to them the story that they're about to tell you about why life's not fair. But I look back at that now, and so I'm thinking, okay, Mom, she's about to tell me, the story about what happened to her and how life's not fair, and she still turned out all right. Or Dad's about to tell me about this and about how life's not fair. And as frustrated as that made me at the time, I kind of need to hear that. I kind of need the story and the relationship to understand, okay, so I'm not in this alone. There are other people, it turns out, when I'm having a pity party, I forget about everybody else, but there are other people who also go through times in their lives or have situations in their lives where it's like, life is not fair. That's not supposed to happen. Aaron and I struggled getting pregnant for a few years and went to the doctor and paid lots of money for different things and stuff like that. And it was really not fair for me to teach at Ed White High School and watch 15 and 16 and 17-year-old girls walking the halls pregnant because of poor decisions that they made. When I have been married for 5 years, have been married for 6 years, have been married for 7 years, have put money aside, and now all of that money that I thought that I was putting aside for a college fund is now going to weird shots and all sorts of doctor's visits and things like that. That's not fair. And so I was frustrated, and I was going through different things at that time. We were able to have Emily. We were able to have James. But guess what? There are other people who went through all of that and more and still were not able to have children. So them looking at me might say, Jay, shut up. I don't care. I'm still here. I'm still dealing with this. I would love for it to be simply a financial thing where I could just pay enough money to the doctor so that they could figure it out. So I understand that it's still, regardless of what we're going through, there's somebody else that can relate There's somebody else who's going through something similar. And so I look at Hannah and I think about how frustrating that must be to know that there's another wife who can have kids who is just rubbing salt in the wound. Says that she's irritating her, that she's provoking her. Almost like that, ha, ha, ha. Here, kids, come here, kids. Hannah, why don't you call your kids? Oh, yeah, that's right. You can't have kids. Come on, kids, and just think about how frustrating and aggravating that must be. How much pain she went through. How it talks about she was downcast and she couldn't eat. She wept so hard. But it's significant that we understand that when life is not fair, when we are going through difficult times, that there's a reason for that. There's going to be something greater that comes from it. Let's keep reading Hannah's story, and we're going to jump over and look at, let's see, we just left off at verse 8. So let's pick up on verse 9. Once when they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli the priest was sitting on his chair by the doorpost of the Lord's house. In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. And she made a vow, saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. As she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk and said to her, How long are you going to stay drunk? Put away your wine. Not so, my lord, Hannah replied. I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief. Eli answered, Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him. Now we're going to jump down to 24. This is talking about when Samuel was born. After he was weaned, she took the boy with her, young as he was, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. When the bull had been sacrificed, they brought the boy to Eli, and she said to him, Pardon me, my Lord, as surely as you live, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I ask of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord, and he worshiped the Lord there. So we see Hannah going through this intense, hardcore, grieving prayer. She is praying so fervently that a priest, who's probably seen a lot of people pray in his day, thinks that she's drunk. So I'm sure that you guys have had some times where you have really spent some time in prayer, or you might have been really calling out to God about something. But think about this. Get the picture in your mind of her praying so fervently that the priest, that Eli, thinks she's drunk. This lady was getting after it. And not in a way that was over the top, but in a way that she thought was just making the connection between her and God. So Eli comes up, thinks she's drunk. She interacts with him. He blesses her. She goes back home. She's able to conceive a child, Samuel. And when he's 3, she brings Samuel back to Eli and leaves her one and only 3-year-old little boy at Shiloh and goes home. I have a 2.5-year-old little boy who may or may not have dumped a bowl of Cheerios all over the dining room table this morning. So if I was ever going to leave him with someone, it might have happened about 8:30 this morning. But I can't imagine what she must have been going through. Year after year, Penina talking about how she can't have kids. Talking about how she must be cursed by God. She finally has a boy, and she made that oath to God that if I'm able to have a child, they will be dedicated to the Lord's service. Now, I'm sure nobody else has ever, like in a time of strife, made promises to God about things that you were going to do, and then maybe didn't quite live up to those things that you were going to do. You were going to, spend less time on social media. You were going to read the Bible more. You were going to call that person. You were going to, those weren't mine or anything. That's just 3 generic things that somebody might talk about doing. And then the day goes, and 2 days go, and a week go, and a month goes, and then maybe you're not living up to your end of the deal. Maybe you're not able to maintain that vow that you made earlier. But I look at this, and I see Hannah, and she made a vow on the life of her child. How easy would it have been for that baby to have been born and her to say, oh yeah, God, see, what I meant to say was it was going to be like he was dedicated to you, and I was going to pray for him every day and tell him what a blessed child he was because he was able to be born when it didn't look like I was going to have kids. Actually, you know what, Samuel, how about when you're 12? When you're 12, then we'll let you go to the temple, or even better, let's wait till you're 18. When you're 18, I will definitely dedicate you to the Lord, and you will be there, and you will do all the stuff that I said that you would do a long time ago. She kept her word. That vow, that oath that she made to God was kept. The last 5 or 6 weeks on Wednesday night with the youth, we've been doing I've Always Wondered. And basically, I just gave the kids little 3x5 note cards, and they got to write questions down of things they wanted to know, things they wondered about, things they wanted more information on. And so if you've never done that with 14 to 17-year-old kids, try it, because you're going to get lots of questions. And they're not completely foreign from what, probably 35, 45, 65-year-old people ask. But we ran the gamut on a bunch of things. And at different times, we had the opportunity to think about, what does it mean to be a good person? Or what are some characteristics you look for in a friend? What do you want people to say about you when you're not around? And one of the most common things that showed up again and again and again was trustworthiness. I want to be friends with someone who I can trust. I want people to say that when the rubber meets the road, Jay's going to show up and do what he said he was going to do. What makes someone good? The fact that when they say something, you can believe them, and you don't have to double check and follow up and say, are you sure? Do you remember that? Remember, you said you were going to do that, so make sure that you follow through on what you said. I've got some little garden areas that I've tilled up in the back that I'm growing stuff on, and my dad just got a new tiller, so I was able to use that to till it up, and I had to call him and follow up with him about getting the tiller out, because we had talked about it, and he was going to do this and do that, and we never could get a day on the calendar. So we got a day on the calendar, and there was something happening that afternoon. And so I was going to need him to come a little bit earlier, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to have to make my dad leave before I leave. Because if he stays and I leave, he's going to do way more than what I need him to do. He's going to go over and above what I've asked him to do. I just need his tiller to till it up. I can pull out the little loose weeds and stuff like that. But when I think about somebody who is trustworthy, for me, it's somebody not only who is going to do what they say they're going to do, but it's almost like you have to keep them from doing more. Like, stop, I got it already. You don't need, no, this is all I need. Look, here's the list of things that I need. Stop adding things onto the bottom that you can do, that you want to do, or anything else. I know you got other stuff to do at home. And so when I think about the stories that Hannah had, when I think about what people said about Hannah when she wasn't around, a woman of her word, a trustworthy human being, someone you can trust in all situations. And I think that that's really significant, speaking from a child's point of view. That when you ask your mom, when you ask your dad to do something, you know that when they agree to it, it's going to happen. All right, the last thing that I want to draw your attention to on this story about Hannah is in chapter 2. And we're just going to read, let's say, the first 5 verses. This is called Hannah's prayer or Hannah's song in some translations. Chapter 2, then Hannah prayed and said, "My heart rejoices in the Lord. In the Lord my horn is lifted high. My mouth boasts over my enemies, for I delight in your deliverance. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. Do not keep talking so proudly, or let your mouth speak such arrogance, for the Lord is a God who knows, and by him deeds are weighed. The bows of the warriors are broken, but those who stumbled are armed with strength. Those who were full hire themselves out for food, but those who are hungry no more. She who was barren has borne 7 children, but she who has had many sons pines away." I think a third thing we can see about Hannah is Hannah loved God. Hannah lived a life as a model of someone who loved God. I look at that prayer, that song, that celebratory time in Hannah's life, and I think, you know, that's the prayer, that's the song, that's the poem that happened after Samuel was born. What was the prayer that she was saying before, when Eli thought she was drunk? And this is completely Jay's opinion. It can't be found in any JVINCR. I bet her prayer was pretty similar. I bet it was recognizing the sovereignty of God. I bet it was saying, God, there's a reason. I just wish that I could understand. There's something happening here that's bigger than me. If it's your will, let me have a kid. If it's your will, bless me with this. And if it's not, help me through it. Hannah loved God. And though this is an Old Testament story, and we look ahead to Jesus, and we look at him being questions about the 2 most important commandments, love God and love others. And I don't know about you, I know I've said this a few times, like loving people sounds really easy until you meet people. They are some people. But what I've noticed is, if I try to love people without loving God, I stink. I am awful. It's hard for me to love myself sometimes. But if I start with loving God, loving people becomes a lot easier. Because I stop seeing them as the annoying, as the loud, as the ones that just won't leave me alone. And I see them as God's creation. And I see them as talented and uniquely gifted by God to do specific things in this world to promote or to glorify his kingdom. So looking back at Hannah's life, she went through some stuff. Her life was not fair. She didn't deserve to go through some of the things she went through, but those trials, those tough times allowed her life to glorify God. It allowed her to have the opportunity to minister to other people. Hannah loved God, and she was a woman of her word. And when I think about some characteristics of a mom, I think those are three pretty great things. Three things that we can strive after, whether we're a mom or a dad, or lucky for all of us, a kid. So when you go out today, if you have a great relationship with your mom and you're going to eat like fried shrimp somewhere and you're going to hang out and take like a great Sunday afternoon nap thinking about how much you love your mom, awesome. If this day stinks for you, if you're like, man, I can't wait till I go to bed tonight so it'll all be over and I can go back to work. When we focus on those three things, be it something we're thankful for our moms, or something we're striving to become more like in our lives, I will tell you, priority one is loving God, is getting connected to Christ. Because all of those other things become doable when it's not based on our power, but on his. Let's pray.